jump to you very I put some things on here. Government versus the government, for government, parliament, legislature, executive, legislature and judicature. Now, most people don't understand what a parliament is, what a legislature is, and who actually is the government of this country. So I'll start off by clarifying something. Whereas the people means we set up the Federation of the Commonwealth of Australia. We are the government. Through us and our constitution, the parliament passes laws for us, not over us. So I'll start with Hansard because it'll clarify the position of the parliament after federation. Now when you go into Hansard, and it's, the light's not very good, the 10th of the 3rd, 1891. No parliament under a federation can be a constituent body. It will cease to have the power of changing its constitution at its own will. That was taken from a federation. So they can't touch the constitution, state or federal. Then Hansard, 7th of the 2nd, 1848. Mr. O'Connor, when the people put the constitution together. We must remember that in any legislation of the Commonwealth, we are dealing with the constitution. Our own parliament do as they think fit, almost within any limit. In this case, the constitution will be above parliament, and parliament will have to conform to it. Now, we had the situation in the Midland Court last week where the police prosecutor, with all his dumbness, not wisdom, told a particular person that the parliament has the power to pass a law to override our constitution. That just shows they don't. So that might help them to wake up maybe. And then we go to this part. Mr. Cochrane. Parliament has been the supreme body, but when we embark on federation, we throw parliamentary sovereignty overboard. Parliament is no longer supreme. Our parliament at present are not only legislative but constituent bodies. They have not only the power of legislation but the power of amending their constitution. That must disappear at once on the abolition of parliamentary sovereignty. No parliament under a federation can be a constituent body. It will cease to have the power of changing the constitution at its own will. That goes into the hands of the people. And then on Hansard, the 9th of the 2nd, 1898, we ought not to create the evil of making the judges not merely interpreters, but extenders of the Constitution. And we ought to give the Constitution such a degree of clarity as will render it capable of being moulded, incapable of being moulded in changed conditions as time goes on, and prevent the dangerous alternative of judicial expansion to where they control us and our constitution by their interpretation. Now, if you go to page 676 of your constitution, it states very clearly the parliament is not supreme, and the very essence of federation is that that must be so. The parliament is subject to the law and must abide by it. You go to page 791, which creates this controversy. It says neither the federal nor the state parliament are sovereign bodies, are only legislatures with limited authority. If they attempt to pass a law in excess of that authority, the law is a nullity and affords no obedience. You'll be told by magistrates, judges and some lawyers, the parliament is sovereign and supreme because they said so. Well, they don't have a say in it. We are. We do. Now, who's the government? That's you. You are the government. You have the final say. The parliament puts legislation together. No, and that's wrong. The executive puts legislation together both at a federal level and a state level. How does it do it? through the Executive Council. There is no Executive Cabinet, there is no National Cabinet, that's all political claptrap, for want of a better word. If I swore I'd go a bit more, but that's literally what it is. Every current sitting politician sitting in a party politic situation is committing treason on the people. Serious allegation, but absolute fact. For a politician not to sit in treason, he's there to serve us. They're not serving us, they're serving their political parties. They're serving the ideals of that party, and they systematically, since they started interfering in our country, and that was 1907, Billy Hughes, he introduced conscription. First part of the destruction of our system of law. He introduced it. Can you be conscripted? No, you can't. It went so far the political parties were so embarrassed in 1946, they put through a referendum and we said no, and it's in the Constitution. 51 subsection 23A states that. You cannot be conscripted. So none of these injections, in my view on that, is we should get a bottle of radiator coolant and inject some glycol in them. If they can put poison into us, why can't we do it to them? But of course you can't do that. They wouldn't like that, because they'd have to start paying with their lives just like they're doing to us. You can't put formaldehyde, aluminium powder and mercury into someone's body without doing damage. It's a permanent thing that systematically destroys your body. So if they can do it, we can, but they don't like that. They call that murder or bodily harm, even though they do it to us. Anyway, getting back to your parliament. Government versus the government. This is their government. The parliament. They claim to be the government. Look at the ads on TV, they say, authorised by the Western Australian government, or authorised by the Australian government. Who the hell are they? That's us. We didn't authorise it. But it's there in front of you day after day. That's why they do it, because people think, oh yeah, that's got to be right. Politicians wouldn't tell you lies. They never stop telling you lies.
Their lips move, so you know they're lying.
Well, this is it, yeah. You're a cop like me, you know. And the worst ones are some hierarchy of the police force, because they're usually Masons. But they distinctly attack people for it. The reason I say government versus the government for the government, so because we're trying to create a government, or are we? No. No. When the parliament, which is the legislature, both at federal and state level, that's all they are. What is the legislature? It's the executive, the legislation and the judicature. The reason it's set in that order, because the executive at the state level is the governor. He selects 10 from the lower house, 8 from the upper house. They are the executive government. He gives them the portfolios. All the portfolios that all these lovely little politicians say they got when they travel all over the world at our expense, when they should be right here for the ability to put legislation together. That's their only job, is to do that. Nothing else. Now, what they do, once they put the legislation together, it goes to the lower house of the parliament, state legislative assembly, legislative council. It's debated and passed according to the provisions of our constitution. If the authority isn't granted by the constitution, it's denied. It remains with the people. That's a fact of law. Now, what happens then goes back to the executive. The executive is, the head of the executive is the Governor General, or the Governor at state level and the Governor General at federal. He looks at what they've done. If he agrees it complies with the Constitution, he signs it for and on behalf of the Crown, providing it doesn't have to go to the Queen for her signification. They've taken that piece out so they can't pass any legislation until they put that back in again. It's been removed, so we don't have any legislation that's lawful in this country. They've taken the Crown out. And I'll come back to that because they did it cunningly over a period of time. And you've got to understand, when he signs it, that binds the Crown, to a law made pursuant to our Constitution. Then, if it's got to go to the Queen, she signs it, because it's in relation to particular things like the appointment of the Governor, his office, his duties and everything else. Because they're put in place with a letters patent. Right, now we go back to Federation. I can stay there, it doesn't matter. Now, on the 29th of October 1900, Queen Victoria was in the British Parliament. She had realised through Sir Edmund Barton and the people who took the draft copy of the Constitution to England, she realised that all the governors of the states and all the premiers of the states were passing laws, multiple laws, for the purpose of sidestepping the Constitution when it came into being. So what she did is she put 9 clauses to our Constitution. Those 9 clauses are very, very important. The most important one is clause 5, because it applies every imperial law to the Commonwealth of Australia subject to our Constitution. So the Parliament can't pass laws. If you go to the police department, to their prosecuting now, they're teaching people they have got residual powers from before Federation. Well, that's where clause 7 steps in. It says, we're on the proclamation of this Constitution, the old entities known as the Australasian Council and the colonies cease to exist. That took place on the 9th of July 1900. So from then, for 4 months and 25 days, the only law was the imperial law, which clause 5 locked into us subject to our Constitution. But if you read Quick and Garron, section 51, subsection 38, it says, and I'll go through the whole section, it says, with the conferral of the Parliaments of the state, the Commonwealth can exercise authority it had at Federation, but it didn't have any, because of clause 7. Clause 7 says, on the proclamation of the Constitution, 9th of July 1900, ceased to exist. So they didn't exist, so they had no authority. That went the Australia Act down the toilet where it belongs. Because there was no power for the Australia Act. It says on the front of the Australia Act, this Act is made pursuant to section 51, subsection 38. Unfortunately for them, they didn't bother to read the annotated version of the Constitution. If they had it, they would have realised that says there was only 7 legislative areas ever exercisable by the Australasian Council, and even less by the colonies. And all 7 are contained in section 51 of our Constitution. And what I've used in the court several times is, you show me where in section 51 you have authority over land. Because I have none. A lawyer will tell you, yeah, they've got residual powers, they can tax your land, you can tax anything. No, you can't. 1904 and 4, State of New South Wales versus the Commonwealth, where the State of New South Wales decided everybody in the Commonwealth was going to pay land tax. But they didn't realise what they'd done, and they actually cemented a piece of legislation in place because a decision of the High Court, once published, forms part of the common law and is binding on the courts, judges and people of every state. And the states are us, but the representatives of the states are our parliament, and they're bound by that. Now, when you look at that, the High Court ruled the Commonwealth does not pay tax on land. Who's the Commonwealth? We don't. So we don't pay tax on land. It's there in black and white. It's a decision of the High Court. I've had it for years, and I only started looking at it and think, the old buggy, you should have realised that a long time ago the decision has been made, but I was relying on the 1923 case, which denotes fee simple in its full form, alienating your land from the Crown, and Lipperhar versus the Queen, 1998, HCA 58 in 1998, where Michael Kirby reiterated the fact that our land is held in fee simple, alienated from the Crown. What does alienated mean? Taken away from, removed from, under the control of. But why are we still allowing the councils to tell us what to do with our land? Because we don't understand the process of referendums. The process of referendum, they're running them under federal so-called legislation, which isn't, doesn't exist. They say it does. But even if they did, a referendum is taken state by state so as not to offend any laws of the state. So it's in the Constitution, very clear. So if it's taken state by state and the state says no, each state says no, why have we still got it? Because 1974 we said no. 1977 they tried to get us to approve the federal parliament paying money direct to local governments instead of paying it to the state to local governments, which is another attempt to sidestep the Constitution and say, well, you approve the payment of the money to them, so you've approved their existence. That backfired. 1979 they added that to the constitutions of the states. But I'll come back to that a little bit because that had a huge effect on the laws of a state and the constitutions of a state. It literally wiped them out. But the 1988 referendum was to add 119A to our constitution. By doing so, you had to approve 4 questions. The first 2 was, do you approve the continuance of local government? We said no. Why have we still got it? It was done state by state, didn't offend state laws. Now they've got a problem. Then we said, the second one was, do you approve the establishment of local government? We said no, so they couldn't even establish anymore. But they did. What part of no don't these clowns understand? Very simple. You got yes and you got no. We said no. They say, oh, that was at federal level. No, it wasn't. They use federal legislation at state level because it has to be done state by state. Now then they come along and they changed our complete electoral system with the Australian Electoral Act. And by the way, if you don't already know, the Australian Electoral Commission lives in Lakes Entrance in a paddock in Victoria. There's no buildings there. I guess they live under a cabbage leaf. There might be some cabbages there. I haven't been there. But anyway, that would add why they're so brain dead. But anyway, at the end of the day, that act is invalid. Why? Because of section 7 through 23 of your constitution. Not mine, it's yours. Well, it's partly mine. So when you look at that, they can't touch the elections in each state. All the people have to be put together into a pool by the governors of the states, both at state and federal level. It states that. In fact, Section 8 of the Constitution says you can only vote for one senator, once. You vote above the line, you're voting for over 500 to each political party. Below the line, 12 people, you're right. For the Senate, 6. Why? Oh no, it's 8, isn't it, on the green paper? 8. You can only vote for one once. Now, what we did is we several times have brought up the fact that we have letters patent for the office of governor, which we now have copies. We can't sell them because we don't know what the price is. We only just picked them up. That's this one. And we've got several of those. But you've got somebody, a young lady that was at the meeting in Leadville, her husband prints them. So we've got those. Quite a few of those. Then we've got the Government Gazette putting in place the office of governor. That's the office of governor. This is the Government Gazette with the correct Crown logo on it, which we are supposed to have on everything. It's on some of our courts. They've taken it off. And these are going to be available shortly in the future. So if you want one, you give your details to my wife and we will get back to you as soon as we find out the prices. And there won't be very much. And we'll send you one. And it says, first Thursday, October the 23rd, 1890, it's when these were gazetted by Queen Victoria, or passed by Queen Victoria, as letters patents. Well, 6.1.9 the Statute of Monopolies says only the monarch can change a letters patent, nobody else. And she never did. So we've got these, and this is the actual state constitution, which I said I'd get last time I spoke to people. We now can get these printed up. They will be, whatever it costs, we don't know. We haven't got an idea yet. But it can't be more than a few dollars. But in the back, you have your schedules. In there says how you vote for one person once. It's all there. This is our state constitution. This is a letters patent. It was put in place by Queen Victoria. It was upheld by King George V in February 1920. It was upheld by Queen Elizabeth II in the Federal Parliament of Australia in 2008. It's there, you can see it quite clearly. You can only vote for one person once. And in this constitution, it has Schedule E, which is the oath of allegiance. With this enterprising little government we got at present, the Labor Party, and we've got all schedules in here, they removed Schedule E with an act of the State Parliament. That act was the Oath Affidavits and Statutory Declarations Act of 2005. It repealed Schedule E to our state constitution, which was the Oath of Allegiance. In 2006, when I was before the Supreme Court, 3 horrible lying little specimens called quorums, being no justice wheel upon the bus in the Supreme Court, said the states existed before federation, and Commonwealth Constitution just came along and sat over the top and enhanced it. Absolute load of nonsense and lies. Did not. States did not. Now, James Andrew McGinty in 1996, HCA 48 of 1996, put the issue to the High Court to get the High Court to state that the states did exist before federation. The High Court said no, and you start at paragraph 17, and it tells you exactly what 109 means, 106 means. What 106 says that federation of states can retain their constitutions, subject to the Commonwealth Constitution. It was put in place in the letters patent just before federation in its original form. Well, perhaps the State Parliament of Western Australia can explain why they removed the 23 sections out of it before federation and put it in place with 23 sections. So what that means, we don't have a state constitution here. We don't have a state, because it was never lawfully constituted under that state constitution. Is that a fact? Yes. Go back into that decision of the High Court. They said the states are created under 107, 108 and 109 of the Commonwealth Constitution and derive their authority from it. Exactly what I said in Hansard of 1898. By the way, the Hansard, that's only 20 odd pages. There's 55,000 pages of documented fact from the Hansard of over 10 years of how the Constitution was put together. This is put together by men, all men, no women, but they're all men, and they have to have a good brain because they remembered it all, they documented it all. You forget they wrote these laws out of their heads. They didn't have reference books, they didn't have computers or anything else. So you got 55,000 pages of documented Hansard between 1890 and 1900. And it's a lot in it. You can get it in the archives of the State Library. I've been in there and poked through it for a few hours over a few months. And I didn't even get a quarter of the way through it. I had no intention of going through it because in Quick and Garran it's got the basics of Hansard which explain the sections, which is what I read to you tonight. At Federation, the states lost any sovereignty and supremacy. They lost the ability to interfere with the state constitutions. Now, if you look at 106, it says their state constitution can continue subject to the Commonwealth Constitution and altered in accordance with their constitution. So they never have the power of change, they have the power of amend, only of alteration, but subject to that constitution. Because it's a letters patent, they can't touch it. They claim they can, no they can't. Because where does the authority come from? You're not a monarch, so you can't touch the letters patent. So you're sucked in that way and you can't touch it. But what does that effectively do? It means this state doesn't exist in law. So what law applies in this state? Commonwealth Constitution Act, 1900 UK, and the Constitution derived from it, by us. Now, if you want to check that out, you go to HCA 39 and 1915, at paragraph 148. So Samuel Griffiths, one of the people who wrote the Constitution, says, here you find section 106 binds the state constitution and all laws made pursuant to it, to the overriding authority of the Commonwealth Constitution. Then he says, if there still remains a legislative area, it can be exercised with the consequences of 109, where it interferes with federal law. The federal law stands, and the other one is invalid. And I draw attention to the word invalid. It's all in there. Then he says it is beyond the legislative authority of any parliament of a state to pass a law that contravenes a federal law backed up by the Constitution. 15A of the Acts Interpretation Act, you know that, you would have got that in police school. It states every single law must be made pursuant to the Constitution to be valid.
You don't see a cent anymore, do you? It's not, it's missing word.
Oh yeah, they hide it. But then when you go to chapter 1, page 346 of the Constitution, it says not all enactments of the Parliament are valid, but those made pursuant to, in accordance with, and under the authority granted by the Constitution, and those laws only are binding on the courts, judges and people of every state. Every other law is void. If there still remains an authority not granted to a Parliament, it's denied and remains with the people. Why? Because we are the government. We are supreme. We are sovereign in our own right. Where does the sovereignty come from? Our common law, the King James Bible. People say, oh, it's not a common law. Yes, it is. Go look at the oath. God is the crown. The Queen is the monarch, God's representative. She swears her coronation oath to uphold the Protestant faith, the Church of England, Magna Carta, 1688 Bill of Rights, the Act of Settlement, the Statute of Monopolies, Chalice Rule Property, and the King James Bible. When Christ said in the New Testament, if you love me, you will follow my commandments, he made you sovereign and supreme. That's the same supremacy in here, because the people who wrote it were Christians. People don't like that idea, well, tough, because the House of Lords is a Lord's spiritual and Lord's temporal, 50%. They represent both sides, so you never get an unbiased opinion, supposedly. Supposedly, I always use that. But then you've got to go back, right back to Billy Hughes, what he did. And then come forward back and look at how they systematically brought all of our parliaments to zero in this country. And they did it. First he tried to knock out the Statute of Monopolies. They did that 19 times, I think, in total, through referendums. But they never ever succeeded. He introduced preferential voting. He changed the emblem from the royal identifier, from this to the kangaroo and emu. It was done in 1907. Then he signed the Treaty of Versailles to join the League of Nations. And I had a phone call while I was on the way down from Geraldton yesterday from a lawyer here. He identified himself, fine, no argument with that. And he said, I've just read where we become part of the League of Nations in 1919. I said, well, you read a bigger lie than Ned Kelly. The simple reason is, how can one person sign away the will of the people without conforming to the will of people under 128 of the Constitution? Oh, but it happened. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. Where was the compliance with 128 of the Constitution to start off with? Where was the application to the reigning monarch to remove our authority and remove the Constitution? There isn't one. And by the way, if you're thinking that the government or the parliament that claims to be a government has the right to put forward a republic, no, they don't. They are in the federal parliament. They are the House of Representatives and the Senate. They are there to represent us, represent our views to our Parliament in relation to the passing of laws proposed by our Governor General through our executive authority or council. Nothing to do with the Parliament. The Parliament has limited authorities, limited by your constitution, mine too. Now, you've got to turn around and start looking at what they've done. They systematically came along in 1942 and passed the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act. Why? Statute of Westminster is law in this country, subject to the Constitution under Clause 5. You can't change it. They can't change it. But they backdated it to 1931, which negated it anyway. You cannot make law retrospective. Did you have your hand up there? That's okay. Anybody's got any questions, don't fail to ask me at the time, because quite often people wait until the end and can't remember them. So if you've got a question, stick up your hand, I'll answer it. I've got no problem with that. And you won't cut me off, don't worry. So at the end of the day, these people are passing laws, the Statute of Westminster. That was John Curtin. He was only in office for a little over 12 months and he died in office. Now they continued it on. They then removed land tax in 1942 in the Great Tax Case in the High Court. They removed it totally and put 7.5% tax on our wages. It's another thing they can't do, but they did, for the purpose of paying for our pension. So anyone who thinks that someone who earns $1 million or $10, if they pay tax, any of those aren't entitled to the pension. Yes, they are, because they paid for it. The only ones who didn't are the politicians. They do 8 years in Parliament and get a huge payout for the rest of their lives. Who gave it to them? Did we? No. They're stealing week by week off the Australian people. And we just say, oh, they're the Parliament, they can do it. And actually we say, we're the government, they can do whatever they like. No, they can't. It's time for people to wake up. And I use my favourite saying, blokes should go into the bathroom, drop their pants and see what they got to make amends. If they got it, use it. Use your brains, use the guts provided to you. Women, they have a baby and go back have another one. You reckon they got no guts? You're an idiot. So you stay out of that little debate. Women have got the guts, give it to your men, kick them in the backside and wake them up. They've got to stand up. We've got to stop saying, oh, we just have a beer and a fag, we watch the footy and we go to work on Monday and keep over and over doing the same old dribble, and you're letting your country fall apart behind you. Now, I said I'll come back to 1979. But there's another issue first, is Queensland removed the upper house of its parliament in 1929, negated the state of Queensland. Every state must have Legislative Assembly, Legislative Council. They removed it. It's gone. No more.